Hello, everybody. This is Parrish Alford with the Daily Journal. We're going to talk some SEC football. I'm joined by our MSU beat writer, Logan Lowery. We're going to look back a little bit at last week's games and look ahead to a couple of big conference games for Mississippi State and Ole Miss. Logan, how are you, man? I know it's a little bit early in the day for you.
It definitely is. I'm not what you call a morning person. I've kind of adjusted to the sports writing lifestyle a little bit. Used to late nights and getting to sleep in a little bit in the morning, but accommodated the schedule a little bit today. It's an hour earlier than what we normally go on, so maybe I'll make it through it.
Well, we'll get back into that 11 o'clock vein soon, but I know that the Bulldogs coming off a big win over Northwestern State in the FCS game, going to Auburn. That's going to be an important test for Mississippi State, I think, a chance to pick up a conference road win against a team that a lot of people had pegged to win the SEC West, if not the SEC overall, and all of a sudden Auburn is struggling. I know you can tell us about that a little bit in a moment. Ole Miss coming off a monumental win against Alabama. The Rebels went over there expecting to win, believe they could win, but probably not expecting to get 5 turnovers. But they capitalized on those 5 turnovers, turned them into 24 points, and scored 43 against Alabama, which to me lends some credence to this idea that Ole Miss has pretty good offense. The Rebels had scored 70-plus in games against Tennessee Martin and Fresno State, and rightfully so. People were saying, well, they haven't played anyone. Well, now that's not true. They had success averaging almost 7 yards per play against Alabama. Still didn't run for 100 yards. We'll talk more about that game. We'll look ahead against the Rebels' SEC home opener against Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt is not like they were last year. They are improved. Ole Miss is still a 4-touchdown favorite. I wouldn't call this a trap game, but it's one that the Rebels will want to come out and play crisp and efficient and not just slog through the week after Alabama. They need to get past that big win in Tuscaloosa. Logan, tell us a little bit about State looking back against Northwestern State. What can you take away from that game?
Well, they started fast, and that's the first time this year that we've seen that offense click in the first half. They'd scored – the offense itself had only scored 10 points in 2 previous games combined. So they started off strong, jumped off to a great start. Dak Prescott only played in the first half. He looked crisp. And really the most telling stats out of that game is Mississippi State set the single game record for yardage in that game, 647 yards for the Bulldogs in that one. And then another telling stat is the quarterbacks themselves, they played all 3 quarterbacks, Dak Prescott, Elijah Staley, Nick Fitzgerald. They threw 4 touchdown passes, and only 2 balls in the entire game hit the ground. They only threw 2 incompletions the entire game, so they were really crisp and efficient in the passing game. A lot of people scored touchdowns in that game. They emptied the benches. I think it was 73 players played in that ball game, 7 or 8 of them for the first time. Got a lot of reps for those younger players. A lot of those junior college transfers got to play a lot of reps as well, and that's really what they were wanting. They didn't get to do that a whole lot in that Southern Miss game earlier in the year because the game was so close until right there at the very end. They didn't really get a lot of the reps for those guys. So this was a great opportunity for those younger players, those redshirt freshmen, to get in the ball game, play some extended reps, and now they've had a little bit of seasoning, when you get ready to go on the road for the first time in the SEC.
Well, I know when you look at a game like that, execution is kind of what you're looking for. I mean, if you go into that game and it's very competitive, there's a problem. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes the FCS team wins 1AA, former 1AA folks, for those of you who might not have kept up with the NCAA's changing lingo. Sometimes those teams win, and we both have seen that, Logan, in the teams that we've covered. But you want to execute it and be crisp. Now you said Mississippi State's offense had scored how many points going into that game?
10.
I didn't realize that. Just 10 points for State on offense. Looking at Auburn, how do you think the midweek news of a new quarterback at Auburn, how does that affect State?
Well, according to Manny Diaz, we talked to him late yesterday afternoon after practice, and he said it's not going to change their game plan at all. They really don't know what to expect from Sean White. Obviously he's never taken a college snap. He's a redshirt freshman there at Auburn. Hasn't played in any of the previous 3 games, so they really don't know what to expect from him. So they're just going to prepare for Auburn's offense as it was with Jeremy Johnson and Nick Marshall and Cam Newton and all the previous quarterbacks that they've had there under Gus Malzahn. They're going to expect the same style of offense, and obviously that's an advantage that Auburn does have is they don't really have the cards on the table with what that quarterback can do, but Auburn's a team that seems to be trying to find itself right now. I think we've all seen that in the first few games. It took overtime to beat Jacksonville State. Talking about the FCS thing, it took overtime to beat them. Lost in a bad way to LSU last week. Got a heavy dose of Leonard Fournette. Mississippi State can kind of attest to that, but it seemed like Mississippi State did a better job defensively kind of containing him than Auburn did. I think Leonard Fournette had more yards in the first half against Auburn than he did the entire game against Mississippi State. So Auburn's a team that has seemed to be susceptible to the run on defense. And I know there were a lot of high expectations for Will Muschamp in his first year there as Auburn defensive coordinator. And so far he hasn't really been able to rally the troops and stop the run. And Mississippi State's a team that, with the running quarterback and Dak Prescott and the bevy of 4 backs that they kind of interchange back there, they're going to probably see a heavy dose of that, come Saturday as well on the Plains.
Well, I would agree with you that State did a better job against Leonard Fournette than Auburn did. And frankly, I can't see a team the rest of the way doing a poorer job against Leonard Fournette than Auburn did. I mean, looking at some of those holes, that they were massive watching some of the replays here. Ole Miss and Alabama, I know that as I was watching that game unfold, and seeing Alabama turn the ball over, I could kind of predict some of the dialogue that we would see this week. And of course, from the Alabama perspective, it was luck. We don't lose that game if we don't turn it over 5 times. And I think you're right. Lots of teams don't lose if they don't turn it over 5 times. You turn it over 5 times, once or twice, might be a misfortune. If it's 5 times, someone is doing something to you and you're not responding. Some of those turnovers were forced now. I'm thinking of the short pass on the deep ball late in the game in the 4th quarter when the Tide was trying to rally, and Jake Coker throws it up and Tony Bridges gets it. Look, Coker was under heavy pressure at that time. There were some other turnovers that were forced as well. I thought Coker, when he was under pressure, responded well at times. And when those Ole Miss defensive backs were deep downfield, he was able to pick his spots and scramble and keep some drives alive and hurt Ole Miss in that way. Alabama, Logan, ran 100 plays on offense. Now, think back with me. It wasn't that long ago that Nick Saban told us tempo offense was like from the devil and wanted to get rid of tempo offense. And Alabama's running 100 plays. And I'll tell you this, 100 plays and no Ole Miss defensive player beyond one, a very important one in Tony Connor, who already was hurt going into the game. Nobody got hurt, okay? Alabama ran 100 plays. Nobody got hurt. Tempo offense, that was kind of the discussion there. Hey, it's about safety. You need to take care of these players. They get tired. You can't substitute, that sort of thing. Tony Connor had a banged-up knee going into the Alabama game. He had actually missed about half of camp, and he aggravated that knee against Alabama, had surgery on a torn meniscus earlier this week. He's going to be out at least 4 weeks, possibly more. That's a big loss for Ole Miss. Looking forward, looks like some young guys who didn't get to play much will be called on a great deal against Vanderbilt and in the weeks ahead. Probably starting with A.J. Moore, a sophomore, and behind him Zedrick Woods, a freshman. It would not surprise me to see Mike Hilton drop down to Husky. That's the Rebels' 5th defensive back, that nickel back. Wouldn't surprise me to see Hilton there. He's been starting at Rover. He's played every position in the secondary. He was at one time earlier in his career a full-time starter at Husky. But I think he'll stay at Rover if A.J. Moore and Zedrick Woods get off to a good start and are playing well there. So tempo offense, Alabama ran it well, ran it a lot, but the Rebels came up with big plays when they had to have them, especially in the secondary. I thought Ole Miss did a really good job, Logan, against the big back, against Alabama's Derrick Henry. He still finishes with, close to 150 yards rushing, but for 3 quarters, they made him earn everything that he had there. And they did a good job of gang tackling, did a good job of keeping him from really getting to the second level of the run defense. He'd run straight ahead, and he might get 4 yards or 5 yards, or he might get 2 or 3. Didn't really break off a lot of runs until you started to see Ole Miss wearing down defensively. Hugh Freeze talked about that on Monday. Dave Womack talked about it more on Wednesday when Womack, the defensive coordinator, came out and spoke. And this team got tired. The tempo offense wore them out, and it was evident in the fourth quarter. And the coaching staff at Ole Miss, they believe it was because they protected these guys so much in the first 2 games and played them. Look, they didn't play as much against Tennessee Martin and Fresno State combined as they did against Alabama. Freeze told us on Monday he believed that hurt their preparation and that they really didn't understand what was expected of them in terms of the energy, and add to that a very humid night, as I know you experienced in Starkville, a lot of that same humidity in Tuscaloosa and other places in the SEC last Saturday night. All of that, plus the fact that Ole Miss was just 11 for 20 on third downs. Alabama converted 11 third downs in 20 attempts. Rebels couldn't get off the field, and some of those were third and long. They weren't like 3rd and 1. Some of those were 3rd and 7, 3rd and 10, and they're giving up those plays and allowing Alabama to keep drives alive. And another thought here, Logan, in terms of those who would say that Ole Miss was nothing but lucky in the game. Certainly there was some good fortune, like the ball bouncing into Quincy Adebojo's hands on the deflection. That resulted in a 66-yard touchdown play. But Alabama had some luck too now when you line up and kick the onside kick and you get that big, sweet hop that Alabama got on that play. You get that kind of hop on that kick, and that's not execution, man. You never know how that ball is going to hop. You just kick it and hope for the best. You roll it out there. Alabama got the big hop. That is advantage to the kicking team when that happens. They were able to recover that onside kick and score quickly after that. And look, and that played also into the fatigue for the Ole Miss defense. I don't think that game gets as close as 43-37 if Ole Miss recovers that onside kick. All of a sudden, they're running some clock. That defense is resting. That game doesn't get that close. But credit Alabama there with the onside kick and the recovery. A bit of good fortune with the big hop right there. What kind of good fortune, man, you think the Bulldogs need against Auburn?
Well, going to Jordan-Hare, they're going to need a lot of it because it's a place that the last 2 trips that I've made to Jordan-Hare with Mississippi State, I've seen Mississippi State outplayed Auburn on the field, and they left 0-2. It's some strange things happen down there on the plains. And, 4 years ago, we saw Vic Ballard kind of helicopter over the pylon. They rule him down at the 1. Mississippi State runs a few plays after that. Chris Relf gets upended by a defensive back at the goal line. Mississippi State finishes inches shy of a win there on the final play of the ball game. Then you go back 2 years ago, Dak Prescott's first start. Mississippi State comes out the gate playing pretty well. Seems like they've got the game in hand. Auburn gets the ball back with a minute. I think it was a minute 59. They got the ball back, drove the ball 80 yards, touchdown with 10 seconds left to go, and Auburn wins that game as well. So Mississippi State hasn't had a whole lot of success at Auburn. Their last win there was in 2007 under Sylvester Croom. So it's a place that Dan Mullen's never won at. So we'll have to see if things work out better this time. I know Dak Prescott's had some of his better games against Auburn. In the last 40 years, there's only been one player that's thrown for over 200 yards and rushed for over 100 yards against Auburn. And it's been Dak Prescott, and he's done it twice now. So that's pretty impressive that, only one player has done that in the last 40 years. And Dak Prescott's that guy, and he's done it twice. So there's something about Auburn that Dak Prescott kind of brings, a little bit extra in that ball game. He's had a lot of success running the ball against Auburn. And that was against some pretty good Auburn defenses. This year, that's not a great Auburn defense. So, he should be able to carve them up pretty well. I'm sure, Will Muschamp's preparing Auburn for that. We'll have to see if they can counter that measure this week. But so far this season, they haven't been able to do that. Looking at the injury front for Mississippi State, they sustained their first major injury of the 2015 season. Long snapper Winston Chapman went down in that LSU game. Turns out it was a torn ACL. He's going to miss the rest of the year, and probably that ends his career as a senior. And, you really don't miss your long snapper until he's gone. A lot of people probably weren't even familiar with his name. And you saw in that first extra point against Northwestern State this past weekend that Mississippi State had a new long snapper. You could notice, they a bad snap. They had to try to, convert it with a 2-point conversion there after the bad snap. Logan Cook, throws it up over his head like that, completes the pass, but A.J. Jefferson, a defensive end, gets tackled on that play, so they don't convert on that first extra point. But looked like Hunter Bradley, the new long snapper, settled in after that. He obviously got a lot of extra point snaps beyond that, with Mississippi State scoring 63 points. He was out there quite a bit. It looked like he'd settled in a little bit. He's a guy that's been in their program for a long time. He's a converted tight end. And, I think he'll do fine now. It's probably that first snap jitters, getting those out of the way.
Well, I tell you what, Ole Miss and Vanderbilt, a couple of years ago, this might have been a trap game for Ole Miss. Vanderbilt was playing at a much higher level last year. They took major steps backward last year in their first year under Derek Mason as coach. Really barely functional at times, not competitive in most SEC games, certainly not competitive against State or Ole Miss. Ole Miss winning 41-3 in Nashville early in the season, a game that was played at the Titan Stadium across the river instead of on campus. What was that Vanderbilt and State score, Logan? It was big. What do you remember?
I think it was 59-0, or 51-0, something like that. Vanderbilt didn't even score, so it was a blowout.
All right, Vanderbilt's better this year. I mean, you can see that they're a little more refined, still struggling, still turning the ball over, but they are doing some things better. They appear to be moving the ball fairly well between the 20s. They've had some red zone issues, but Johnny McCrary at quarterback is throwing for almost 300 yards a game. Still only, 4 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. I look at Vanderbilt with their run defense and, the SEC team that they have played, Georgia, ran it on them really well, and Georgia's a very strong rushing team with Nick Chubb, 280 yards for Georgia in that game. Not so much with Vanderbilt's other opponents, but look, Western Kentucky doesn't try to run the ball. They're 123rd in FBS, and Austin P is Austin P. I think there will be some opportunities for Ole Miss to run the ball in this game. And, look, anybody can make you look bad in this conference. We know that. If Ole Miss comes out hungover from the Alabama game, if they come out and they are unfocused and there is no intensity, there's the potential for them to look bad in this game. There's the potential for them to lose if they come out and try to slop through it, because that's just the way the conference is. I'm not expecting that for Ole Miss. This is where coaches earn their $4 million a year, Logan. 4.3 for Hugh Freeze, and I know it's 4 and change for Dan Mullen. Certainly, they earn that money for big wins like Ole Miss had last week at Alabama, but also in games like this. It's important to bring the team back down, to have them grounded, and to have them ready to play in games like this. I don't see this as a trap game. I do see this as a game that Ole Miss could come out and look a little sloppy if they are not focused, but I don't think that will be the case. A lot of big players, a lot of Ole Miss's best players really had big games against Alabama, and that's what the Rebels needed. I wrote earlier this week, Logan, throwing out Chad Kelly and Robert Kimdichie for Heisman Trophy consideration based on the big win that Ole Miss had, based on the fact that now people are considering Ole Miss among the front runners in the SEC. If they continue to win and these guys continue to play as they have in the first 3 games, they're certainly able to be a part of that discussion. Kimdichie, I thought, had the best game I've seen him have in his Ole Miss career. at Alabama, 6 tackles, which is a lot for a defensive tackle, but then 2.5 tackles for loss and half a sack, one that he actually shared with his brother Denzel Kimdichie, the outside linebacker. A big game for Robert Kimdichie, and those are just the plays that he made. That's been the knock on Kimdichie during his career, is he hasn't been able to finish plays. There's been no question about the attention that he commands there on the defensive line, the double teams required, and the ability that other players have to free themselves up and make plays because of that. Ole Miss, again, this week will move him along the defensive line, and they'll try to find matchup advantages for him, and I think they'll find that against Vanderbilt. Chad Kelly kind of let himself go in the second half, started just playing and reacting more, thinking less. Got off to a slow start against Alabama. He was 4 of his first 9, and of those 5 passes that did hit the ground, 3 of them were batted balls at the line of scrimmage. He got past those early first quarter problems and really played well in the second half. 305 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. Just another big game for Chad Kelly, a monster performance on a big stage. And it's that type of performance and that type of stage, when you get it there, that's what could have him in the Heisman conversation if Ole Miss continues to win, if Ole Miss continues to see Kelly put up these kinds of numbers.
Yeah, and looking at some guys that impressed me here in that Northwestern State game last week, a guy like Donald Gray, a junior college transfer. He's only a sophomore, so Mississippi State will have him for the next 3 years. But he had a lot of high expectations. A junior college All-American. Mississippi State thought he could really have an impact in their passing game this year. But so far through the first 2 games, he hadn't caught a pass. And this week we learned why. He had a hamstring injury, so he wasn't healthy until last week. And then he comes out, catches 4 passes for 140 yards and a touchdown. Some spectacular catches. The pass that actually broke the school's all-time record for passing yardage from Dak Prescott, that Donald Gray made over the shoulder. He kind of leaned back, reached back, and caught the ball. Was interfered with by the defensive back, drew the flag, and still caught the pass. It was a pretty amazing thing to watch. And I really think that a playmaker like Donald Gray is going to help Mississippi State's offense. He's a home run threat every time he touches the ball. He's got some moves. He's got some speed. He's a guy that Mississippi State really likes. They signed him out of high school. He's a Memphis guy, and he didn't qualify, so he spent 2 years at junior college. He redshirted one of those years at junior college. So Mississippi State is going to have a huge playmaker in their receiving core to kind of counteract what De'Runnya Wilson and Fred Ross have done. He's not the same type of receiver as those guys. He's a little smaller. He's a little faster. He's got a little wiggle to him. So I really think Donald Gray is going to help their passing game moving forward. And then a true freshman in Jamal Peters had a great game this past week against Northwestern State. It's really his first extended playing time on defense. He's done an incredible job on kickoff coverage for Mississippi State, and that's a huge part of the game. Dan Mullen really emphasizes the special teams aspect, especially for younger players, kind of emerging and kind of making an impact there before they make an impact on either offense or defense. And Jamal Peters played well. He had a sack in that ball game the other night, and I really think it's kind of the start of a huge career for him back there at safety. I don't think he's quite ready to be an every down safety for Mississippi State just quite yet, but that's coming in the near future.
Well, maybe, Logan, we can send Brad Locke down there to ask Mullen about injuries. I put Ole Miss winning against Vanderbilt 45-14 on the blog. I don't see this as a big trap game. I think the bigger possibility for a trap game is next week at Florida. Tell me what you got for State at Auburn this week.
I'm actually picking Auburn. Believe it or not, as bad as they've played the last couple of weeks, as much as I've seen down there the last few years, I've seen Mississippi State play extremely well down there and still get beat. So until they win down there on the Plains, I'm going to stick with Auburn.
All right, folks, that's it for this week's edition of Talking SEC Football. Soon you'll be able to hear this as a podcast on your smartphone as well. We're working on that at the Journal and hope to have that for you soon. Right now, come back and join us next week. We'll be around at 11 o'clock next week instead of 10. Thanks.